Hi, I'm Lori Byron, a pediatrician who's cared for kids in eastern Montana on the Crow Indian Reservation and here in Billings, Montana for several decades.
And I'm Rob Byron, an internal medicine specialist who cared for adults in the same area, working with Lori most of that time. And we're your co-hosts on Our Planet, Our Health. We will feature conversations with people from across Montana, most healthcare professionals who help us to learn more about air pollution and the climate change it's causing and the impact it has on our health, and also working on our behalf to address that. But health is important to all of us, not just healthcare professionals. So some of our guests are professionals in their own right, also working to protect our health. Today, our guest is filled in both of those areas.
So today the title of Our Planet, Our Health is A River Runs Through It, and we have Dr. Kris Spanjian, who's fairly recently retired in Billings, Montana. And Kris, we're kind of interested in your roots, where you started from, where you were raised, what was your childhood like?
Well, I grew up in California, which is something you don't always want to mention around here in Montana, but that's where my roots are. It's interesting, Lori, I grew up in the neighborhood where the recent Altadena fires started. In Altadena, I lived about 2 blocks away from Eaton Canyon, and that was the canyon where a lot of the fires took off. And I spent my years running around in that canyon and playing, with bugs, animals. There was a nature center there that I loved, and when I was a little kid, I said, when I grow up, I'm going to be the person at the nature center to teach everybody about nature. I was really into it. It was fun. It was a beautiful little place. But, back then, in the 60s, the smog was horrible in that area. And at times, we couldn't even see the mountains, the hills that were right there. That was probably less than a half a mile as the crow flies, and because the smog was so horrible. I have since visited that same neighborhood before the fires, and it has cleaned up quite a bit, and I think that's due to a lot of the regulations that have been enacted since that time. In the 1970s, a lot of those regulations were put in place to limit emissions and smog control devices on cars, and I think it made a big difference. It's something that I get a little frustrated here in Montana because a lot of people don't take that seriously, but because there are so fewer people that live here. But for me, I know what it could be if things get out of control, and it's impressive what a few regulations will do sometimes for the good. But I grew up in a family. There were 5 kids of us. My dad and my grandfather and my uncle, they all had a family business. And as kids, we all in the summertime got to work in the family business to get an idea of what it was like to work for our allowance. And we did a couple of camping trips when we were kids. We weren't big outdoor family really, other than, like I said, us kids running around the canyon. But we did do one that was very memorable and I think stuck with all of us as children, and that was a pack-in trip into the Sierras, Kings Canyon and Sequoia National Park, when we were kids, with a couple of families. We were not horse people, but we got on a horse and we got out there, and the leaders of the pack, they just dropped us off and we were on our own, and made our own little camp and spent a week there right by a little lake. Did some fishing then, little bit, and that I think instilled in a lot of us this amazement for what's out there in the natural world. It was quite memorable. We moved later on in my high school years down to the San Diego area, to a rural town called Fallbrook, which is was the avocado capital of the world. It's inland from San Diego. It was a small town at the time. Still is fairly rural in some parts of it. And I went to high school there, small little high school. Graduated from there, went off to college, and one thing led to the other, and I ended up in medicine.
Okay. So, Kris, how'd you end up in Montana?
You know, that was interesting. I had started my career in Rapid City, South Dakota, as an anesthesiologist, and then I got interested in critical care medicine, which is ICU medicine, as you folks well know. And I went back to school after practicing for a while to go through another fellowship. And when I got out of that fellowship, I wanted to practice critical care more. And where I was working wasn't available. It wasn't open to me. So I ended up at the University of Colorado and taught there in Denver for a couple years and enjoyed it. But Denver's a big city, and I enjoyed being in a smaller city. And so a job opened up here, and I was able to take it, and that's what brought me to Billings. And you know, I've really loved this community since then. I've retired, not working anymore, but I still don't see myself leaving. So we've put roots down.
Thank you.
So we've heard it said of other people that they had a vocation just to support their avocation, and perhaps your career in medicine supported your avocation. So maybe you want to jump into telling us some about that.
Well, it might be true. But I would say my avocation, which, folks, for those of you who don't know, I'm a very avid fly fisherman. And I would say that fly fishing was a way to help me get through the stresses of my vocation of being a critical care doctor and an anesthesiologist. Because, you know, when you're out there on the water, the calm one feels just connecting with that water and all of its surrounding and all of its inhabitants really moves your brain from all that stuff at work and makes you concentrate on one thing that's trying to fool a fish and try to connect with that little animal, and then you take in what else is going around you. I think, as you all know, nature does help heal us in a lot of different ways, and I think if it wasn't for the ability to get out and do that, I would have had some more stressful times. And it's not just fishing too. I've also been a hunter, and I've particularly a bird hunter with my dogs, and have done that. And again, getting out and seeing the habitat of these other animals, it just helps the soul, you know. So. But fishing has been my concentration of late, and as you see on the screen there, I am now involved heavily in our local Trout Unlimited chapter called Magic City Fly Fishers. And through this chapter and connection with Trout Unlimited, I've learned a lot about what's going on in the natural world now with our issues with climate change. And other things that have hurt our natural environment, and it's something that I think has now made me focus more on conservation than I think I had been even 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kris, would you mind sharing with our audience a little bit about it? Because I know you've traveled to many places in the world, and that may help provide a little more perspective on some of the questions or some of the things we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Yeah. It's true. I have traveled around the world fishing, and it's interesting to see some of the wilder places that I've traveled to, but that even those are getting affected by the changes in our in our climate throughout the world. For example, we have fished in Belize, but more recently, the changes in the tides that people can't explain, or the water levels that have gone up and down in record levels that the locals can't explain, but it does hurt or change the whole patterns of the fish migrations, and where they used to see fish spawning, they don't see them spawning there now. They're elsewhere. They don't know where they are. Many are going into deeper water because of the shallower water, which is where I usually fish. It's what we call the flats in the salt water. It's where the water is, I don't know, anywhere from 2 feet to 6 feet, 8 feet deep. It's in the shallower parts of around reefs and atolls. But those fish are not coming up as much because of the water temperature. So they're staying in the deeper ocean more. So that's just kind of one thing that people have noticed, that the locals have noticed, and are, can't do a lot about it, but it's become an issue because obviously a lot of them depend on fishermen like me for their livelihood and for their own provision of fish for their families, and it's harder to find. There are also things like invasive species that have taken over and taken advantage of the warmer water where the native fish have not been able to, such as a lionfish in the Caribbean. That's been a big problem. Then you go to places like Mongolia, where you're out in a place where it's very wild, and it hasn't been. Many parts of it have not been affected yet by population growth or development, but it is getting that way. And as the temperatures have changed there, I mean, things have changed for their flocks, or their herds of animals that they have, and it's more difficult and to find forage for them. So many of those peoples that used to be just herders and sheep and goat and camel and yak herders, they are all end up moving to the cities because it's harder and harder for them to make a living because of that. So it's impressive. It's not just in our country. Whatever we do with our industry does affect all over the world, So.
Thanks. So in Montana, what are you seeing related to climate change affecting your ability to fish, other people's ability to fish, and rec tourism people, the ability to have a job?
That's right. Because we know that recreation tourism is a huge part of the economy in the state, right? Well, you probably are aware that in the southwest part of the state, the rivers, Big Hole, Beaverhead, Ruby, they've had a lot of problems there with fish lately, where they've had to close the season because the waters are too warm and they're too low. Between the drought and the heat, these fish are having a lot of problems. They're calling them. We see them and they're diseased and dying, and they're calling them zombie fish because they're still half alive, but they're covered in a fungus, many of them, to the point where they obviously can't survive. There's some that are having something called head necrosis, where their heads are just opened up and no flesh on them, and it's horrible and it's sad. And there's a lot of scientists, biologists, epidemiologists, etc., looking to try to figure out what's going on. But one thing they do know because they haven't found the exact cause. But one thing they do know is that fish that are in colder and cleaner and deeper water are not getting this. It's the fish that are stressed by the high temperatures and the low water. And with fish, of course, as all living things, we need oxygen, right? And the fish get oxygen from the water. Well, when the temperatures get high, less and less oxygen in the water. So the fish don't die exactly from the heat. They're dying from lack of oxygen. And when fishermen like me try to fish, or those fish, even though we release them after we catch them, many of us, it's too much stress on the fish when the temperatures of that water get too high. So if the temperatures are over, say, 68 degrees, it's very stressful on those fish. And so to catch them, even if we're going to release them, is too much of a stress, and they often don't make it after that. So that's why we have regulations by our Fish, Wildlife, and Parks folks to limit the time, the hours of the day that one can fish, because when it gets too hot, it's tough. So there's that. Then there's also with the wildfires that we see, the ash from the wildfires, when it hits the water, makes the water more acidic, and that's a problem in a lot of places around this country from wildfire risk, and that's not good. We also see a problem with floods. As we all know, the 2022 floods were pretty severe around here. Caused a big change in the rivers. Obviously, just massive amounts of water and debris down those rivers. It scoured out a lot of the areas where the fish spawning areas, which we call redds, were scoured out. The aquatic insects that these fish eat were also scoured out, and their eggs. So we have had a long time for some of these rivers to recover from this. But the other hard part was that when that happened, and all that debris was stuck everywhere, large earth-moving machines were used to move all that stuff out. And as they drove through, and they drove right through Rock Creek and some of these other creeks, they made it worse. They made the bottoms worse. They disrupted more stuff. And then a lot of the landowners on the side have said, well, we don't want this flood to happen again. So they put up stuff called riprap, which is rocks, cement, even old cars along the banks to try to keep the banks stable. The problem with that is it just makes the water actually go faster for the next flood, because it funnels it in. And what you really need is wood, other debris, other bushes, etc., and allow some of the water to expand a little bit of a flood plain, but also make more habitat for these fish and aquatic insects to survive. And so right now there's a lot of restoration work that has to be done on our local rivers, like the Stillwater and the Rock Creek. So that's in the planning, but a lot of stuff is happening, and actually I'll have to say there's a lot of groups that are working on that to try to help restore these rivers. But it also, like you said, it affects us. You know, it's not just the animals and the fish. All of us depend on that wild area. Some of it for our mental health, some of it for feeding our families. I mean, yes, people do, a lot of us do catch fish and eat them too. And also for all the industry, because fishing industry in Montana is huge. And as you probably are aware, there's a lot of people from around the country and even outside of this country that fly to Montana and spend a lot of dollars in all our local businesses just so they can fish our very famous clean water, and we have to keep it that way. Yeah.
Thank you, Kris, for making all those connections, and especially both locally and globally on that. Let's shift a little bit. We all know there's no single answer to climate change or to air pollution. There are a lot of things that need to happen, but one of those things is helping people learn to like the outdoors. Mm-hmm. And what are some of the things that Magic City Fly Fishers and Trout Unlimited are do along those lines to help make those connections to the outdoors for people?
Well, first of all, we have a big youth program where we actually go into the schools, mostly the middle schools now, and teach fly tying and just bring up, talk to them about conservation issues and the importance. There are several teachers in our area who are very, very supportive of this, and they are also starting fishing clubs for some of these kids. We have a day camp that we put on June 1st through 5th for 10 to 14-year-olds. And we do it out at Lake Elmo by the FWP Region 5 headquarters. And we have some of the FWP scientists and biologists come and teach them about fish, teach them about the bugs. That's a big one, where we can bring the bugs in and all the kids get to play with the bugs. And we teach them about proper ethics of fishing and how to conduct yourself in the outdoors, and about conservation and the importance of all this. And we hope, and I do believe, we touch some of these young people and spike a little interest in the great outdoors. We also have connected recently with Rocky Mountain College. They have a fly fishing group that's a club that's just started up, and we've connected with them. Montana Trout Unlimited also has a youth camp at Georgetown Lake that they put on every year, so we do that. I have, of course, we have regular meetings, but we are trying to, right now, raise some money to support some of these conservation initiatives in our local Beartooths. And so we're actually putting on a fundraising banquet, which we hope everybody will come to on May 15th. But at any rate, to raise some money for these conservation issues. And we also sponsor a women's fly fishing group to get some more women involved in the sport. There's a lot of women out there that would be interested. It's hard because, of course, families and all that kind of thing to get going. But once we get a little interest going, you'd be amazed how many people end up sticking with the sport and saying, and even if it's just for, even if they only get out fishing 3 times a summer, it's still something that's good for them and good for, and also the more people that we get involved in fishing, the more we'll start appreciating their environment and how important this outdoors is.
So I think a lot of people don't really know a lot about Trout Unlimited. I mean, I think fly fishermen and I think conservation, but I'm not sure everybody thinks that. But it sounds like the conservation work that you're doing, that it's made more difficult, or you have more of it to do because of climate change. Is that correct?
That's probably true. Absolutely. Trout Unlimited's been around for a long time. It is a conservation organization more than it is a fishing club, and that's basically there to protect, conserve, and restore cold water fisheries. And again, you're right. It's become more of a challenge as things get warmer and warmer. We know we have to work together with industries. We can't just pretend that businesses are going to go away or people are going to stop using fossil fuels, because it's not going to happen overnight. But we're trying to partner with these other groups, and it's kind of fascinating that, well, I'll give one example. The Sibanye Stillwater mine, they have entered into a good neighbor agreement with the communities along the Stillwater River to work together to minimize their impact on that river. And they've actually been very, very receptive to people from Trout Unlimited and other organizations to keep that river flowing and clean and clear. They monitor their water the water there. They know that there's a potential for contamination, but they do what they can to limit that. And you know, it's one interesting thing I just found out too recently, that the push to find critical minerals and rare earth elements for all of our computers and things that all are chips that we need to use in modern life. If there's a researcher out of Colorado School of Mines who found that if we took all the waste of all the mines in this country, hard rock mines, and milled it, we could get all those critical minerals that we need for the foreseeable future of this country. And so that's something that I think the mining industry has actually considered and has would actually like it if we could get our federal government to help fund the beginnings of this kind of a work, as opposed to making, you know, more expensive, more drilling, etc., which is going to be very expensive, but to keep it local and use the waste that they're producing and still come up with some great stuff. So I mean, Trout Unlimited is trying to work with industry to work on these problems.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, Kris, we're pretty close to out of time, but what are a couple of ideas that you would like our audience to take away from our discussions today?
You know, I think one thing I would like to say is that conservation and fighting this climate change and other issues that are hurting our natural world starts with every individual. I have heard people say, well, why should people in the United States do this because China doesn't do it or some other country doesn't do it and it's not going to make a difference. I think we should all individually be leaders. There is no reason to take the easy way out and say that, because that'd be the easy way to do it and to put your head in the sand. I think each individual person can make a difference, and once one or two people make a difference, if the group grows little by little, we will make some progress. So I just hope that folks don't take the easy way out and say it's not my problem, because it is. It's all of us.
Can't sum it up better than that. Thank you, Kris.
Okay.
We've all learned today.
Thank you.